Hi, everybody. The webinar you've reached is the U.S. and Israel War in Iran, Global, Regional, Local, and Cultural Perspectives. I want to welcome everyone from the U.S., from Israel and Palestine, elsewhere in the Middle East, other places in the world. This is the latest in Partners for Progressive Israel's webinar series, Conversations with Israel and Palestine. My name is Ron Skolnick, and I'm privileged to organize the series. In a few minutes, I'm going to hand it over to today's discussion moderator, who's Partners Executive Director, Rabbi Margo Hughes-Robinson. But before I do so, I will note that Partners for Progressive Israel is a U.S. nonprofit dedicated to the achievement of a durable and just peace between Israel and its neighbors, which will require an end to Israel's occupation and a recognition of the right to national self-determination of both the Jewish people and the Palestinian people in the land. Partners supports Israelis working to ensure social justice, Jewish-Arab partnership, and equal rights for all of Israel's inhabitants. The organization wishes to deepen Americans' understanding of the complexities of Israel, Palestine, and broader Middle East so they can advocate for a progressive future for all the inhabitants of the region. Partners for Progressive Israel is glad to be bringing this webinar to you for free. If you appreciate it, if you'd like more programming like it and help us keep it going, please visit progressiveisrael.org, and if you can, make a contribution. Um, Two quick things before I introduce today's panel. Partners for Progressive Israel issued a statement on the war on day one of the latest conflict, and we'll be posting the link in the chat for those who'd like to take a look. Hopefully not while our panelists are speaking, but certainly while I'm speaking, you can have a look at it. And also with all the holidays, both today and upcoming, I just want to share greetings of Happy St. Patrick's Day, Eid Mubarak, Chag Sameach, Happy Passover, and Happy Easter to all who celebrate one or more. Um, Quick note about the chat and the Q&A button. If you'd like to ask our panelists a question, please place it use the Q&A function, press the Q&A button and place your question there. That's what we're going to be looking at for today's questions. If you have something else to say that's not a question, you can share that in the chat. You can introduce yourself. You can reach out to other people. The chat will be open, but that's not the place where we'll be looking for today's questions for panelists. Okay, let me get going. I will say that one of our panelists, Mauricio Lapchik, is currently dealing with, I'm actually getting a phone call from him right now, is currently dealing with sirens in Israel, and hopefully will be able to join us soon. Um, but I'm going to introduce him in the hope that he joins us. I'll introduce all of our panelists and hope that he joins us as we get into our webinar. So, first, Barbara Slavin is a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center in Washington and a lecturer in international affairs at George Washington University. Prior to joining Stimson, she founded and directed the Future of Iran Initiative at the Atlantic Council and led a bipartisan task force on Iran. She authored Bitter Friends, Bosom Enemies, Iran, the U.S., and the Twisted Path to Confrontation. She also researched and wrote the report Mullahs, Money, and Militias, How Iran Exerts Its Influence in the Middle East. Barbara is a regular commentator on U.S. foreign policy and Iran on NPR, PBS, and C-SPAN. As a career journalist, she's covered a variety of foreign policy issues, including the Iran-Iraq War, the Arab-Israel conflict, and what the U.S. has termed the war on terrorism. She's also traveled to Iran on 9 occasions. Dr. Galeet Dardashti. And if you want to read, by the way, the full bios that are on our Facebook event page, I'm just making them a bit shorter, but you can read the full bios there. Dr. Galeet Dardashti is joining us. She's an award-winning and trailblazing musician, anthropologist, educator, and culture creator of Middle Eastern and North African Jewish culture. As a scholar, she specializes in Mizrahi cultural politics and music. She has held recent assistant professor and fellowship positions at Penn, NYU, JTS, and Rutgers. As a performer, Dardashti is widely known as leader and founder of Divan, and from her solo release, The Naming. And in her most celebrated solo release, Monajat, I hope I pronounced that correctly, she sings and composes around remixed recordings of her famed Iranian grandfather, who is also known as the Nightingale of Iran. Dardashti also co-created the award-winning podcast, The Nightingale of Iran, about her family's Persian musical legacy, and she's now creating educational curricula and live performances around the podcast. I'm going to not introduce, I'm going to, share Mauricio's bio in the hope that he joins us, so you know who Mauricio is. Mauricio Lapchik, who I hope will be joining us soon, is a political activist and the spokesperson for member of Knesset Ayman Odeh, leader of the Hadash Ta'al faction in Israel's Knesset. Mauricio holds an MA in comparative religions from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and previously served as director of external relations at Shalom Achshav Peace Now. Let me hand things over now to Rabbi Hughes-Robinson. I'll be back at the end to wrap up proceedings, and I'll try to get in touch with Mauricio and see if he can join us.
He's
Thank you so
here.
much. Oh, that's
Welcome,
great.
Mauricio.
Hello. Hi, sorry.
No apologies needed. We're so glad
Do
you're
you hear me?
here.
You
We
hear me well?
introduced you,
Yes.
and
All
yeah,
right.
hope everything is okay.
Yes, we're
Everything
so
is fine. Oh, we had some technical problems only. That's all.
Okay.
thank God. We're glad you're here.
All
And
right.
if you need to at any point, roll out. Also, we completely understand.
That it doesn't depend. It's not depends on me, but there might be a chance because it was a tough day today.
Understood. And actually, with that in mind, I wanted to open this conversation with actually sort of a check-in with all three of you of just how are you holding? I have sort of a sub question for each of you under that heading, right? But like, would love to hear from you each about just what's going on right now, the state of the war from your area of expertise. And so, Barbara, if you wouldn't mind, I'd ask you to start us off. I just would love to hear sort of what geopolitical concerns are you holding right now? Like, what questions or concerns feel most pressing at this stage of the war, particularly with this morning's news?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. Look, I'm thinking about all the people who are being hurt, who are being killed, about all the devastation and destruction that is going on all over the region, and asking, the question of why and how will it end, and will it have been worth it? Um, it's very, very tough to watch. I mean, I've been to Iran 9 times, and I'm seeing, pictures of places I know full of smoke and flames, and damage done to cultural treasures in Isfahan and in Tehran, and it's extremely painful, especially when I'm not exactly clear on what it is that Israel and the United States are trying to do. I mean, Israel, I think, is simply trying to weaken and degrade the military capacity of Iran, and I understand that. But I question whether it's worth it, and what the outcome will be, whether it may not even be worse than what Israel was facing before in terms of enmity from the Iranian regime, if not the Iranian people. This morning's news, I've interviewed Ali Larijani 4 times, starting in 2006, and I mean, he was an ideologue. He was certainly somebody who had a sort of standard Islamic Republic view of Israel and the United States and the West in general. But he was someone that you could interview, someone you could talk to, someone you could argue with. And he had a record of trying to reach accommodations on the nuclear issue and other issues with the United States. So I question the Israeli strategy of simply killing Iranian leader after Iranian leader. How is that supposed to advance Israeli interests if you get more and more ideological, ignorant, and difficult characters running what's left of the regime? I'd really welcome other panelists' ideas on this, because I just find this whole policy morally repugnant, but also strategically very, very questionable. Do you necessarily get a better result? I mean, Hamas is still there after multiple leaders being executed, and Hezbollah is still sending rockets into Israel even after the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. So I'm upset, I'm sad, I'm worried, and I hope it ends soon.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I'm grateful for your foregrounding. Also, the concern for just the human cost of this war, where very little kind of strategic goals and outlines have been articulated thus far by the countries waging it, and the governments waging it. Galeet, I want to turn to you. In your recent JTA piece, which I'll share in the chat, you were sharing some of your experience the last several years researching your own family history for your podcast, The Nightingale of Iran. And I just would love like to hear sort of maybe an expanded version of where are your hopes and concerns right now, personally, familially, just in light of what you know about Iran's history and your own connection to the people there and the culture and the country.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Margo. Yeah, my concerns at the moment, I mean, I would probably echo a lot of what Barbara said, but my concerns at the moment are significant, really, for all of those in the region. It's really challenging to achieve what you want if you don't have a real plan. And we've seen so many scenarios in recent Middle Eastern history where dictators were removed and things turned to chaos and left countries even worse off. And we know that the Iranian people have suffered so much, and I'm worried about innocent lives that have already been lost throughout the Middle East, and about more that will come. And I wrote about that briefly in my piece that you mentioned, but really the focus of what I was writing about was reminding people who the majority of the Iranian people are, and how different the reality of Iran was just decades ago. Because I feel like this gets lost, especially in the context of beating the drums of war. I created the auto documentary The Nightingale of Iran with my sister, and it was to tell our family story and remind people of this recent history. Our grandfather, Yunus Dardashti, was a religious Jew in Iran, and yet he became a radio star there in the 1950s and 1960s. He had a radio show every week that the entire country listened to. And he was known as a Jew. People knew that he was Jewish, and he was known as the Nightingale of Iran. He was adored by Iranians of all faiths. And it was a period in which there weren't limits on what minorities and women could pursue, and Jews and Muslims were intermingling. And so, in fact, it was actually the first prominent female singer in Iran who discovered my grandfather and helped launch his career as the first prominent Jewish singer in Iran. And we also interviewed an Iranian Muslim man named Habib Partau, who was a prominent wrestler in Iran, and he told us about his close friendship with our grandfather, and he told us that since both he and my grandfather were religious, that they often had to stop what they were doing when it was time for prayer, and each prayed together in the same space separately, but facing different directions. My Saba, my grandfather, towards Jerusalem, and Habib towards Mecca. And so I don't want to over romanticize that time. Things were not perfect. The Shah was a dictator, and modernization and secularization didn't benefit everyone equally. But Iran was a very different country less than 50 years ago, and that was not a dream. So really, my greatest hope is that Iran can become a more moderate country again, as the vast number of Iranians want it to be. And if that happens, and that's a big if, my dream is that my family will be able to visit Iran for the first time with my father, who hasn't been there since the late 1970s.
Thank you so much. And yeah, just to echo back, I was speaking with a close friend of mine who was born in Tehran earlier this week, actually about, like you said, how much actually has changed. That this is not sort of a static history that we're looking at in Iran, but the regime is only a few decades old. And I appreciate also you naming like the real complication of life under the Shah, right? This friend and I were joking about actually looking at archival footage the other night about what, like what was happening, and just like scenes of life in Tehran, and jokingly, right, this person said, well, we had Savak, like, the secret police, and the flight attendants wore mini skirts, and it's just a little complicated. It wasn't like this is better, this is worse, but rather this is not a static, right? It is within a single lifetime that we've seen these incredible changes, within Iranian life and culture and the onset of the regime. Mauricio, I wanted to turn to your experience now. I'm just curious if you could share with us what the mood is like in Israel, as well as what it's like to be members of the only opposition party against this war, as well as watching, right, the other opposition parties within Israel shift either to the left or to the right in response to this war as it continues.
Well, first of all, thank you all. Thank you, Margo. Thank you, Ron, for the invitation. It is a pleasure and an honor to be with you here. So, the first thing I want to say is that we are in the 17th day, I think, if I'm not mistaken, of this war. And I don't think it's correct. I think we are in the 683 day of this war. And I think it was mentioned at the beginning that there is no real plan for this war. And I don't think that's correct. I think there is a very clear plan, at least from the Israeli government, is to turn our lives into a constant war, a constant and permanent state of emergency. And unfortunately, after it's like it's a war inside another war. First the 7th of October, then the genocide, then the war with the Lebanon and Hezbollah, the first war with Iran, the second war with Iran, and one war after the other. And the public, I feel, especially this time, uh, kind of uh, kind of got into this mood of permanent state of emergency. And at least for the first 2 weeks of the war, we'll see what the polls will say in the next couple of days, is that the majority of the Jewish public here in Israel supports this war, even though there are those who oppose the government. But we're talking about numbers that reminds me of what were the numbers right after the 7th of October. We're talking about 90% of the Jewish population here supporting the war. If we include the Arab population, that's 76% oppose the war. It means that in general, it's 82, 83% of the population here in Israel who supports this. Again, it doesn't mean that they support the government, but this is the general mood. And we see this, first of all, with the response that you mentioned, Margot, of the majority of the leaders of the opposition, leaders so-called, who are in one way or another. There are those who support it even more. There are those who say that, yes, we support the actions of the army, but we do not support the actions of the government. I really don't understand how we can separate the two things. But we see that also in media constantly, today, I already lost the count of how many people, how many leaders in Iran were killed by Israel and the United States since the beginning of this new war. But you see people, celebrating on TV, being happy. I don't know. I really don't understand. Maybe I'm weird. Maybe this is not what most of the people think here, but what this will bring to us, how this will improve our security. Just today, I was talking, and we realized that we went to the shelters, I think, 8 times in 24 hours. I'm not complaining about it because at the end, I have a shelter, we're safe and everything. We have people in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Iran, in Lebanon, that they do not have shelters, they do not have how to protect themselves. But you know, I think that we'll start to see change in the next couple of days. There are already, from the very beginning, there were protests already against the war from what we call the far left, the left here. But this, I think, will increase. Will also more people will join these initiatives. But I also must say that both also Ayman Odeh, for whom I work with, and the Hadash party, or the Hadash Tal coalition, was together with Ram, were the only parties that from the very beginning had a very clear position against the war, calling this for what it is, a political war, an extension of a constant, a permanent state of emergency. And the first week, a couple of days after it started, we already have a, no, a motion against the government, something that you do every week. Generally, when there is a war, the opposition said that we cannot act against the government. We must act as one whole body. There is no coalition. There is no opposition. This is what Lapid said 1 week after the war started, that there is no opposition here. We're all together in this. Of course, this is the greatest present we can give to Netanyahu's government, to Smotrich, to Ben-Gvir, everyone to act in a way that we are all in this together. But no, if we want to say that Israel is still somehow survives as some place where it's a little bit of democracy, I think it is our mandate and obligation to oppose this war. Yes, I hear also from the United States that there are people who oppose this war because at the end, the only result of this war is that the prices of the oil are rising and rising, and the value of life is falling and falling. And this is what is happening, like if there is a war, or if they want to normalize a permanent war or an eternal war, what they're trying to do. So our role is to normalize the opposition to this reality. And this is what we are doing. If we're succeeding, we'll see in the future. I believe that we'll see in the coming weeks more people, more opposition leaders, I believe, who will take this stance, who will start to oppose as they have must oppose from the very beginning. But I think it's a first step.
Thank you so much. And you've already sort of taken us on the journey towards the question I was going to ask next. But I'm curious, Barbara and Mauricio, especially if you could give us a little bit of background of how we got here. I'm wondering, Barbara, if you could maybe speak first to just what 2026 has looked like so far for Iranians. Right, this war is not sort of arriving without a very intense social context within Iran itself. And maybe afterwards, Mauricio, if you'd be willing to sort of further connect how we got here from right just less than a year ago, 8 months ago, June of 2025 to this moment from an Israeli political perspective. But Barbara, if you would start first, please.
Yeah, sure. Let me take it back a little farther. Let me take it back to the election of Donald Trump the first time. One of the things he campaigned against was the Iran nuclear deal that had been negotiated by Obama. And he quit that deal unilaterally in 2018 when Iran was still in compliance with it. And he did so in part because of pressure from Israel and from pro-Likud types in the United States, his prominent donors, people like the Adelsons in particular. And tensions rose between Iran and its neighbors and with the United States. And Trump ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force, in 2020. So that's sort of where we left it in his first term. Then Iran, of course, began to enrich more uranium, to build up its missile forces, and so on. Issues were not resolved under the Biden administration, in part because of the outbreak of the Gaza war. There were, for the first time, direct Iranian strikes on Israel and vice versa. After Israel assassinated, you see a pattern here, some prominent Iranian officials in a consulate in Damascus, Syria. And so the shadow war that had gone on for at least a decade between Israel and Iran was out in the open then. And then Trump comes back again, and we see hostilities increase between Israel and the United States. Trump has a kabuki negotiation process led by his son-in-law and a real estate friend, Steve Witkoff, that appears really never to have been a serious negotiation. And in the midst of negotiations, the US and Israel attack Iran in June for 12 days, or US joins for 3 days, and now again. There are a lot of reports that Iran actually was putting on the table a fairly decent offer on the nuclear issue, which is something Iran has been willing to negotiate about. It's not been willing to negotiate about missiles or about its regional partners. And so once again, US and Israel, this time much more devastatingly, attack Iran. Israel, as I mentioned once, I think in particular to degrade Iran's missile capability. The nuclear program is still pretty much in ruins from the June war. And I think Israel is really interested in sowing chaos and making Iran into a failed state. I worry very, very much about this whole policy of decapitation, of urging people to come out in the streets when they have no viable way of taking over from the regime, and that chaos and disorder is sufficient for certainly Netanyahu. As for Trump, I mean, his goals change by the day. You know, one minute he's declaring victory, and the next minute he says, well, the war has to go on a little bit longer. And now, of course, he seems to be surprised that the Strait of Hormuz has been closed and that he can't figure out a way to force it to open again. So we have total strategic confusion in the United States. But I think Bibi's focus is laser clear, and he knows what he wants. And as Mauricio pointed out, most Israelis seem to support that goal. And here we have to blame Iran for calling for death to Israel for 47 years. I mean, this is what you get at the end of the day if you're not willing to give up your hostility toward Israel as a, you know, a Jewish-led state. So plenty of blame to go around.
Thank you so much. And Mauricio, I wonder if you can sort of answer from an additional
Mm.
perspective, right? How did Israel and the 90% of Israelis or Jewish Israelis who are in favor of this war get here from June of 2025?
Well, I think that because of the intense reality that we live here, people, the public, I think, tend to forget what were the promises that were made before, at least last year, after the first Iranian war, where Netanyahu, after the 12 days, the so-called 12 days war, came out and said, we have defeated the regime of Iran, we have eliminated all the nuclear activity and other things that, you know, after the beginning of this war, of this escalation, we realized that it wasn't true, or probably he lied, as he knows to do all the time. So the public tends to forget that. And the other thing I want to say, and I agree, Barbara, with what you said. At the end, Iran is considered to be the biggest enemy of Israel, or at least this is what politicians or Netanyahu has been selling to the public and the international community for many, many years. And I think that there was one of the things that I noticed is that a lot of people, especially from the liberal camp, were very interested or were very supportive of the Iranian people who went out to the streets in last month or 2 months ago and were killed by the regime. And they were very interested to see them to live in freedom, as everyone deserves here. Everyone, Iranians, Israelis, and Palestinians as well. But it is interesting that while they call for freedom for Iranians, again, that they deserve that, they forget that our country, our state, occupies another people for so many years. And the situation in the West Bank and in Gaza since the beginning of the war has become even worse from what it was before. And I'm saying this something like it was impossible to imagine that the situation can worsen after what they went through since the 7th of October till now, and since the government took power till now. So it is fine to imagine or to think that, okay, maybe the regime will fall, maybe there will be another future for the Iranian people. But I think it's a little bit naive to think that specifically the United States and Israel are interested in give freedom to other people if people will look back at history, and I'm not a specialist, I don't feel very comfortable of talking about the history of Iran, but I read a little bit and I was very interested in the past also. If we look if we look what happened before, there was the Shah who was answering or was working very closely with the United States and the West. And before that, there was a democratically elected leader, Mossadegh, who was overthrown by the British and the US as well. So I don't know what they expect. I know as a fact that every time the United States intervened in other country, yes, if it's in the Middle East, if it's in South America, Latin America, wherever else, I haven't seen yet any example where democracy and freedom emerged. What I saw is more chaos, more violence, more war, more death. Yes, we have the example of Iraq years ago, 20 years ago. And we also, there are those maybe who remembered what Netanyahu said in 2002 when he was at the committee in the Congress, in the US Congress, where he said clearly that if we take down Saddam Hussein, who has he's working for nuclear weapons and everything. If we do not do that, we will get the elimination of the people in the Middle East. It will be very dangerous. And the United States, after that, went for that war, and we know what was the result. So I don't understand what the people, or I'm trying to understand what the people here are believing, but I think we're being misled by our leadership. And this is exactly the problem that we're going through constantly, one time and another. And this is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have here if we want to preserve Israel's democracy, if we want to fight for freedom and for the end of the occupation, is that the leadership here, most of the leadership, I will say 90%, also from the coalition and also from the opposition, are not telling the truth to the people, are lying to the people constantly. And some of them, they are aware that they're lying, but because they think that the public is going to the right, they are saying things that they might feel more comfortable to them to hear right now because we're in a war mood. So you cannot be against the army. You cannot be against the official policy of the state. You can criticize the government. If, for example, Netanyahu now is working again with Jonathan Odeh, who worked for Qatar, and other very small stories that I don't think they're relevant for the moment right now, because at the end, they will not really change what we're going through. But if we do not start to tell the truth to the people, and if we do not start to tell the Israelis, specifically the Jewish Israelis, that this war is another chapter, another episode in a TV show that is called An Eternal War, this will not stop. It is okay if you think that it's justified to attack Iran, if it is okay if you think that Iranian people deserve freedom. But first of all, we need to look at the mirror and understand that while we are in a constant state of war, Israel is destroying itself constantly. It's destroying its democracy, its institutions. We see what is the situation in the Knesset. We see what the laws and the bills that the government and the coalition is trying to promote. We are seeing what is the situation of the Arab public here as well. We see what is the situation in the West Bank as well. I don't know if we will have time to talk about this, but like just as nothing, a couple of nights ago, a whole family was eliminated, was killed by the army. Yes, I'm not talking about Jewish settlers that are killing Palestinians every day with the support of the state and with the support of the army. We're talking about soldiers who killed a whole family that were coming back from buying things for the holiday, for the Ramadan, and they were killed. Only two kids survived, and these kids are telling that the soldiers told them that we just killed dogs. This is what is happening right now. And in any normal country, we would expect that the government or the state will do something against this, that the people who were responsible for these assassinations of innocent people and innocent family will pay the price, will be charged, will be arrested. Today, 3 days after this happened, there is not even one people who was arrested or investigated for this. And this is just an example. We need to remember also what happened in Gaza. Yes, and what is still happening in Gaza. How many families, how many kids, 20,000 kids were killed, and nobody, not even one person, one responsible for this, was questioned from the actions of Israel. So this is what we need to ask ourselves. If it's worth now to still and to live in a constant state of war while our country is self-destructing itself.
I think you raised a really important point, Mauricio. Thank you so much, especially regarding, I think, right, all three of the countries that we're talking about. Just two things I want to lift up. I think one, which we've already spoken about, is the need to separate between the government in power and its people, right? Actually, regardless of polling, right? That the governments are making choices and the need to respect the humanity and human rights and value of life of the people like under the domain of these governments and to separate the two, but also that all three of these countries, whether we're talking about Iran, Israel, or the US, and I'm not drawing an equation, a one-to-one equation between these three governments, but right, that we're actually talking about three nations that are in profound internal turmoil that are also now sort of engaged in a very disastrous, unstrategic conflict as well. Something I wanted to return to, I think that you raised a little bit, Mauricio, that Barbara, that I wanted to ask you to follow up on is actually about not the reality, but the if you could give us a little bit of insight into the public perception of the United States and Israel. I would say particularly like partners noted in our statement 2 weeks ago, right, that this is not the first time the United States has intervened to try to install a pro-Western government or intervene to create regime change explicitly in the last 70 or 80 years in the US, and it did not go well last time. But that like what the perception is also of Israel or the US internally to Iran, even to be perceived as liberators, or if this is being done on behalf of the Iranian people. I think we're aware that both the US government and the Israeli government is using that language, but is it resonating at all with the people of Iran, just given like public perception of those two countries from within Iranian society?
Well, look, Iran is a country of 90 million people, and I think it's very difficult to generalize, obviously. Look, there were a lot of people who came out on the streets and cheered that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed. There were a lot of people who, when Trump said help is on the way back in January, were encouraged that the United States would really help get rid of the regime. But I think, feelings now are obviously mixed. People hate the regime for putting themselves in this position where Israel and the United States have yet again gone to war against Iran. They, at the same time, are not happy to see their country being bombed and to see so much in the way of damage to infrastructure, to monuments, civilian deaths like those poor schoolgirls who were killed on the very first day of the war because the Trump Pentagon couldn't bother to recheck its target list from 10 years ago. So there's enormous callousness, I think, on the part of the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government about whether they really care about the Iranian people. But many Iranians were desperate. And I will say that, Iranians in general have not been supportive of the Palestinians, or they used to call them Arab causes. And, there would be this chant at the protests, no to Gaza, no to Lebanon, my life only for Iran. They're not Arabs, and they don't have this natural sympathy, and they feel, many Iranians, that why is our government more Palestinian than the Arab governments who don't seem to care and who do business with Israeli governments and recognize Israeli governments. Now I think people are just even more miserable and desperate and scared of what is going to follow this war. Iranians are nationalistic. They don't want to see their country fall apart, be broken into pieces. The government has always been very effective in using the bogeyman of Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and saying, do you want to have a failed state or do you want us? I think most Iranians still would rather have the regime than chaos. But nobody can really gauge. And also, we should say that the government has been very effective in throttling the internet. So we're getting little snapshots here and there. We're hearing from people who are getting out to Turkey, who get a phone call through to friends and family outside, but we're not getting a thorough picture of popular opinion in the country because of the wartime situation. So, we'll see when it ends where we are. It's just such a pity. I mean, this is a regime that has resisted efforts at reform going back to the Hatemi era of the late 1990s, particularly the Green Movement. There were opportunities there that the regime crushed, but now I feel like the war is also crushing opportunities as well.
That's I would say hard to hear, but I'm grateful for the astute analysis. Um, Say going back to June 2025, when we led a briefing here at Partners, actually about the war right after it ended in late June, we really became aware of how little so many of our constituents actually have had access as an audience to the history of Iran, especially prior to the current regime. And so I want to turn back a little bit, Galeet, to you, if you're willing to share a little bit about your experience researching some of your family's history and the history that's documented in the Nightingale of Iran, and just to illuminate a little bit of that family history.
Yeah, thank you. Just piggying back on what Barbara was just talking about, I thought I'd get to go to Iran. I've never been there. Barbara, I'm jealous that you've been to Iran so many times. I applied to graduate school in 1998, and Khatami was elected in 1997, and it looked so optimistic. He was this reformist, and I really thought I was going to be the first anthropologist in decades to study the Persian Jewish community and to study my grandfather's legacy. And that's what I applied to graduate school to do. And it didn't go in that direction, so I had to kind of shift my focus. But, through this podcast that I created, I returned to some of this research that I began in grad school. I ended up studying much more Mizrahim in Israel. But like, you said, Margot, most people don't really know much about the history of Iran at all, and most had no idea that Jews were so successful in many realms of Iran before the Islamic Revolution. And I just want to remind people just one note about history that we haven't talked about, and because we've been talking about people, having protesting. And I just want to remind people that the Islamic Revolution was a revolution, we're talking about 1979, of religious and secular Iranian protesters coming together, right, to overthrow the Shah, and they won. But a theocratic government wasn't what many of the protesters were expecting. And, we could talk about that history, but, that was a successful populist revolution. And, it's just hard to know what fills the vacuum. Of course, this is a very different situation. But again, if there's a vacuum, what will fill it, we have no idea. In terms of the Nightingale of Iran and my own family story, we knew about my grandfather, that he was this star in Iran. Also, we knew that my Jewish father was a teen pop star in Iran for a year before he came to the United States and before he became a cantor. He had his own weekly show in Tehran where he'd sing on television. This was a really different time. And another surprising thing for many people was the relationship between Iran and Israel, right? Iran and Israel had such a close relationship that, there were flights between Tehran and in Tel Aviv every few hours. It was a 2-hour flight. And when my grandfather immigrated to Israel in the 1960s, he didn't think he had to give up his audience in Iran. He was flying back and forth between Israel and Iran, and he could have, his adoring fans there in there in Iran, and he thought he could do that. He could continue doing that forever until he couldn't after 1979. So that has been very surprising to audiences to learn, and of course the close relationship between Muslims and Jews in Iran. I've been excited to share with people because this has been very surprising to listeners to know that there was this, around, let's say, 40-year blip in Iran where things really changed. Of course, it was a top-down enforcement of this secularization and modernization, but there's no question that there were incredible changes that Iran saw occur in a very short amount of time. And there were many, many discoveries that I made and my family made in the course of this podcast of histories that I didn't know about either, which I won't reveal. You'll have to listen to the podcast to hear about them. But it really is a surprising history, and history is not at all linear. Things move in a direction that things don't move towards progress, and there are just many ups and downs in the history of a country, and Iran is a perfect example.
Well, thank you. And Barbara, I'm wondering if you could illuminate for us like some of the larger political historical movements behind some of the family history that Galeet is sharing. I'll add particularly also we're a politically progressive audience here at PPI, and I think to some extent people are likely familiar with the hostage crisis in 1979 and the war with Iraq in the 80s. But I'm wondering if you could share a little bit of broader background, also about some of the political flattening that's happened in the several decades. For instance, I don't think people are as familiar with, like, say, the purges of leftists in the late 1980s and other things that have sort of led to, again, this reform-resistant version of the regime.
Yeah, sure. Well, people can read my book, Bitter Friends, Bosom Enemies, which was written now about 20 years ago, but it has a lot of the history. Look, the revolution was fought by a number of people for a number of reasons. And as I think Galeet pointed out, basically, it was hijacked by the right-wing Islamic fundamentalists, Shia fundamentalists under Ayatollah Khomeini. He used the hostage crisis when 52 American diplomats were held hostage for 444 days to flush out his opposition, the sort of more liberal, pro-Western elements still within the regime, as well as some of the very left-wing elements that had supported the revolution, so that his own faction would emerge triumphant. And then there was a war with Iraq that went on for 8 years, and that was also used to purge opposition to the regime. When Ayatollah Khomeini died in 1989, when the war was also over, there was hope that things might change. And there were overtures that were made toward the West. But for a variety of reasons, they failed. And Iran also was very hostile toward the peace process between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, and supported terrorist attacks in Israel that helped bring us Bibi Netanyahu the first time around in 1996. So a very counterproductive policy on the part of Iran. But yes, as was pointed out in 1997, Iran got a president. Iran's system has elected presidents as well as a theocrat at the top. And Mohammed Khatami did reach out to the West, and there was interest, particularly in the second Clinton administration. A lot of progress was made. And to my mind, still the biggest missed opportunity was after the September 11, 2001 attacks, Iran supported the United States in getting rid of the Taliban in Afghanistan the first time, helped create the first post-Taliban government for Afghanistan. Under Khatami, who was then in his second term, proposed negotiations on all the outstanding issues of concern, from the Palestinian issue to the nuclear question. But George W. Bush put Iran on an axis of evil in an infamous State of the Union address in 2002. He had neoconservative members of his cabinet who saw Iran as perhaps the next target after Iraq. And those opportunities shriveled up. And then Iran got a very belligerent president named Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who had conferences on Holocaust denial and who accelerated the nuclear program. We got to Obama, and Obama was interested in reducing tensions, and there was an Iranian president after Ahmadinejad, Rouhani, who was interested. We got a nuclear deal, and then, as I pointed out, Trump quit that, and it's been pretty much downhill ever since. So, I blame both sides for what's happened. I particularly blame Donald Trump for leaving the Iran nuclear deal with nothing to replace it. I think that set in motion the wars that we're seeing now. And I don't know what will happen within Iran if we will have another opportunity to negotiate with a government there. I suppose at some point we will, depending on who's still alive when this is all over. But there has to be an end to this confrontation of 47 years. There has to be realism on both sides. There has to be a recalibration on both sides, or we are just going to be stuck in this nightmare forever.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. A very erudite summation of several decades of history. It's extraordinary, and I'm very grateful for it.
Read the book. It's only 200 pages.
Excellent. Okay. I will say it is part of my own spiritual practice that I think one potential antidote to despair is action, and another is really deep learning. And so I do want to encourage folks to let this be the beginning of an entry into additional depth on this topic. I do think we can move just more smartly. The more information that we know, I realize more smartly is not a thoughtful way to say that. Right. And we're all sitting in the emotional overwhelm of this moment as well. And Mauricio, I want to turn back to you a little bit and lift up two questions from the chat. One is just about the larger NGO sort of non-governmental organizing peace camp. I know we partners quoted the initial statement from the Peace Policy Forums early on in response to the war, but I'm wondering if you could talk about sort of in the interim where the peace camp is, and then maybe alongside it, what might it take in terms of organizing, in terms of voting or anything else to shift some of this, I'll use the quote from the chat, the regional hegemonic drive into a more sort of strategic foreign policy within Israel that serves both the region and Israelis, Jewish, Palestinian, or of other backgrounds.
So thank you for your questions. Regarding the peace camp here, the immediate answer was not completely clear if most of the organizations are against or support the war. But I think it's a tough question, and I think it's also after all these years and months of constant and permanent war, I think every time each organization, they need to ask themselves, okay, what do we think about this? What do we think about the impact that will have on our lives here? But we're seeing how, for example, last Saturday, there was a protest where I think 20 organizations and movements joined, organized by what we call here the Peace Partnership, which is a coalition of different organizations which started after the 7th of October, mainly with all kind of actions, protests, and events opposing the war, opposing the genocide, and opposing the occupation. I believe that this weekend we will already have, I think, three different protests or actions against the war, The first one on Thursday evening, is organized by a coalition of women who were actually before all this and with the hostage situation as well. They were in front of the struggle against the war, were mainly women. This is something wonderful. On Friday, I know that Standing Together is organizing their first protest against the war. And on Saturday evening, there will be another protest of most of the organizations and movements in Avima Square in Tel Aviv. Um, it's hard, and also as someone who worked at Peace Now before my position, I know what is all the time. What is the question, or the main question, when Israel is again on a new war? If we are going to oppose this automatically, or if we are going to give some kind of explanation of what is our standing. And I think sometimes it's true for us, or for Hadash, or for the party and the movement. It is easy because we see this as a war, which is an American war with the help of Israel, another one. And of course, Israel has their own aims and interests on that. But at the end, without the United States, Israel will not be able to be in this war, at least not to survive in the way that we are surviving right now. So it's an easy stance and an easy decision to take. But I know that for other people, it's not so easy, and there are other things also that they are more, I think, complex to everyone, and it's okay and it's fine. It should be like that as well. But what I want to say is that, and this I want to really to give some respect to all the activists and the movements and the people here, that after so many months already of this reality, they are coming back again and again and again to the streets to protest. Yes, if it's against the war, if it's against the occupation, if it's for a hostage deal, if it's for whatever else, people, and also, with the reality we have with the rockets and everything, to go out to the streets and to oppose and to resist. I think this is something that we should appreciate. And I believe that this will keep growing I hope in the coming weeks. Now, I wanted to say a last thing is that we tend to think that this is about Israel and Iran. It might be, but this is not the main issue, or at least this is what I believe. At the end of the day, the core issue for Israel, it is, and it will be forever, as long it will stay here, and it will remain, the occupation of the Palestinian people. We can talk about Iran, we can talk about the danger of the regime, we can talk about this war, we can talk about the war last year and before, but as long as we do not get into some kind of political settlement, and if we do not end the occupation of the Palestinian state, of the Palestinian people, and creating a Palestinian state alongside Israel on the 67 borders, we'll keep going and we'll keep find ourselves in this situation. Today is with Iran. I believe that if Iran, let's say that Iran, the regime falls and everything will be pink and our future will be great. I think that Israel will need to find another enemy, and that will be Turkey. That might be another country. And I think that will happen exactly the same. Netanyahu will take us to war with Turkey, and then all the opposition will say, yes, Turkey is the biggest enemy we have. We need to eliminate them. And it's very easy to live like that. It's very easy to believe that we can live on our sword forever. But unfortunately, with the sword, will only die. So as long as we do not focus on the main issue, which is the Palestinian question, and I want to remind here to everyone who is listening here that in 2002, there was an initiative of the Arab League which said clearly, yes, we're talking about 24 years ago, a lot of things changed, but they say clearly that if Israel agrees on ending the occupation and establishing a Palestinian state alongside next to Israel, they will recognize Israel as well. And what is more surprising is that not only Arab states agreed to that, also Muslim states agreed to that. So yes, we missed an opportunity back then. Now, in a times of crisis, everything is being rebuilt. Yes, and we'll have a very, I don't know what is going to happen in 1, 2 years, but it will be a different Middle East. It will be completely different situation. So I think that we will need, it is required here to have leadership that will make the people understand that as long as we do not deal with what is happening in the West Bank, what is happening in Gaza, and we even didn't mention here Lebanon, but this is something that is being discussed also here a lot because we had yesterday a call for 450,000 reservists to go to the north, and apparently Israel is pushing for a new invasion of the south of Lebanon, which I didn't live that because I wasn't born, but I know that people who were born in the 80s, they know what is the meaning of another invasion of Lebanon. And there are a lot of examples of how disastrous this was for Israel as well. So they're planning this again. So we're going into another war without even closing the wars that we had before. So they're very good at opening new fronts. They're terrible in closing those. So for now, all the fronts are open. And this is very comfortable for the government because when people need to take care about their kids, about what to do if there is no school, about all kind of issues to survive, to think how to survive this time, it is very easy for the government to use this situation and keep advancing the judicial overhaul and all the plans that they had before. And the last thing I want to say, I'm sorry, is that since its government took power in December 2023, 3 years and a half, we have been at war of almost 4 years. Yes, and this is something I think that it never happened before. But this is their plan, and it is clear, and
I
that's what I have
appreciate
to
you
say.
drawing that through line. And please don't, I'm cutting you off, not for because of
No, 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 it's
lack
okay,
of
it's okay.
interest,
It's my
but
fault.
rather just
My
respect
fault.
for the time.
My
But I
fault.
do want to lift up what you said, that I think like what you're saying is true, that we can't continue to live by the sword. It is not sustainable statecraft or policy for anyone in the region. And I just want to echo your gratitude for the tenacity of our movements to keep showing up and to keep talking about this and raising our voices. And like you said, envisioning an opposing alternative and another way of being and another vision of what the Middle East could be. I will say in terms of what we can do next, I put in the chat, I just want to highlight Partners is joining a number of organizations in supporting the Mothers Barefoot Walk for Peace with Women Wage Peace and Women of the Sun this Sunday, March 22nd. And I want to hand it over back to my colleague Ron Skolnick to close it out. But really, again, so much gratitude for the three of you for being with us and sharing your insight and your expertise.
Thank you, Margot. Thank you, Mauricio, Galeet, and Barbara. Thanks to everyone who joined us. We hope you came away more knowledgeable from today's webinar. Partners for Progressive Israel issued a statement on day one of this war, focusing on the fact that there is more than one truth at the same time that's at work, and that's what we tried to do in this webinar, is to give a little bit more shading rather than reaching out into conflicting and arguing poles. So we hope we were able to share some of that nuance, and I think our panelists did that really excellently. I really appreciate that. For those who missed the opening, I will have to say again, while today's program has been free, generous contributions or would enable the organization to deliver these events at no cost. So again, the donation link is at progressiveisrael.org. If you can make a donation, check out upcoming programming or the partner statement on the war in Iran issued on day one. Please do so. And again, Eid Mubarak, Chag Sameach, Chazis and Pesach, Happy Passover, Happy Easter, and Happy St. Patrick's Day for all who celebrate. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you.